We're going to call to order our May 23rd, 2017 hearing of the Board of Appeals. We have 5 matters on for this evening. They all deal with Cellco Partnership's application to install cloud radio access network camouflage wireless antennas on 5 existing utility poles in the town of Milton. The address is 283 Blue Hill Parkway, 134 Blue Hill Avenue, 4 Annapolis Road, 133 Center Street, and 5 Brook Road and Central Avenue. The rules of the board are such that we're first going to hear from the applicant, then we'll hear from anybody who has questions regarding the applications, and anyone who wants to speak in support of these 5 applications, and anyone who wishes to speak in opposition to the applications. My name is John Leonard. I'm chairman of the Board of Appeals. With me this evening to my immediate left is board member Nick Gray, and to my immediate right is board member Kathleen O'Donnell. Kathleen O'Donnell, this is her first meeting tonight, recently appointed to the board. She's a Milton attorney, former special counsel to the Board of Selectmen of the town of Milton, very active in civic affairs and charitable affairs in Milton. And we really have to thank our moderator, Bob Hiss, for ferreting Kathleen out and convincing her to take this job and spend some evenings with us. But we're very thrilled to have Kathleen as a member of the board, and welcome aboard.
Pleased to join you. Thank you.
And so with these applications, as I indicated, we're going to hear from the applicant. They're all going to be consolidated. The applicant will make a general presentation regarding all of the applications, and then we'll deal with specific ones.
Sure.
And see if there's anyone who has questions regarding a specific location, whether anyone wants to speak in opposition or to assent to the application. The applicant here is seeking to install these devices and claims that they can do it as a matter of right. The building commissioner has indicated that they need a special permit, and I'm sure Mr. Lanzetta will be able to help us through that sticky wicket of local bylaws and federal laws and regulations and the like. This hearing is being televised this evening and being tape recorded, but our official record of the proceedings will be this tape recording right here. So that we'd ask that before anyone speaks, tell us your name and address. Speak up nice and clear and loud. We have a fairly large room, and we want everyone to be heard. So with all of that, I think in terms of evidence here, we have these 5 applications, and Mr. Lanzetta has supplied us with affidavits from 2 experts, one is Donald Hayes, Jr., a radiation safety specialist, and Mr. Hayes has submitted a 14-page affidavit. Dated March 31st, 2017, and we also have a series of plans by Nexius showing the various locations. They're dated 12/6/2016, and we have another affidavit, which I hope I can find. I have it. It was here when I looked at it a few minutes ago. Here we go. Mr. Lanzetta, can you help me with the name of the gentleman who's...
Sure. It's a radio frequency report from Keith Valente from C-Squared Systems.
We have it. Thank you very much. And that affidavit is dated April 17th, 2017, and it's in 4 pages with with some exhibits attached to it. So the applicant is being represented this evening by Joshua P. Lanzetta of the law firm of McLean Middleton, located, well, in New Hampshire, but you also have an office in Woburn. I didn't.
We do. We have multiple offices.
And
Yes.
you're from the New Hampshire office.
I am. I work primarily in Manchester, New Hampshire.
Good. Well, welcome to the Board of Appeals.
Thank you.
Why don't we hear from you on your opening statement, and we're delighted to have you here all the way from Portsmouth, New Hampshire.
Thank you very much. Good evening. Thank you for having us this evening. My name is Josh Lanzetta, as the chairman said. I'm an attorney at McLean Middleton.
Excuse me, would you mind moving over to that? Sure, you're speaking just to them, and we can't hear you.
Sure.
Sure, do you mind?
Over here? Sure.
Sure, that's,
Absolutely.
just bring the mic with you.
And maybe a little more loudly, too.
Can you guys hear me? Good? Okay.
Yeah, that really is just for the television.
Okay,
And it
great.
really doesn't project your voice.
All right. I can be loud.
That's great. Thank you.
So I'm an attorney at McLean Middleton. Our law firm is outside counsel to Verizon Wireless in New England and in the Commonwealth. With me this evening, I do have a few companions. Keith Valente from C Squared, who is the radio frequency engineer. You have a submission from him. Ralph Colarusso is a site acquisition specialist from Nexius. And also another McLean attorney, senior attorney Betsy Mason. We're here this evening to propose the installation of a cloud radio access network in Milton. And the network is comprised of small cell antennas, or what we call canister antennas. We've requested two forms of relief from the board tonight, so we're essentially working a dual permitting track this evening. The first is a reversal, or we're asking to evaluate denied building permit applications. And we do have 5 applications, separate applications for 5 separate and distinct antennas on 5 separate utility poles in the public right-of-way. I'll refer to those as the application generally. Asking to evaluate Milton zoning bylaws for permitting by the building permit process first. And in lieu of that, if that's not the way the town chooses to navigate its zoning bylaws, and we're not here to say that one way or another is the proper way, we are requesting a special permit. So 2 dual permitting tracks this evening. Essentially, what we're proposing is to install stealth antennas on utility poles in the public right-of-way. These antennas are a pinpointed antenna technology, and they are a stealth antenna. So they're camouflaged as a common electrical transformer. So those gray cylinders that you see commonly throughout Milton, Massachusetts, the country, on every 3rd or 4th utility pole, these antennas are specifically camouflaged to resemble those, so virtually indistinguishable from an electric transformer. They're designed to function at a low elevation and to create a finite room, if you will, of radio frequency coverage. A great analogy for this technology, which is not new, but it is new in Massachusetts. We've been working on these for about a year and a half or so in Mass, and also in New Hampshire and Maine, Connecticut. Not new technology, but new to the area. Essentially, we're creating finite rooms of frequency in kind of the larger macro house, if you will, or umbrella of coverage that all of the wireless facilities that you're kind of used to now after 25 plus years of having the towers that you see while you're driving in the interstate provide RF coverage. These antennas are placed in locations where there are coverage gaps and capacity gaps. And the goal of the placement of a cloud radio access network, or a CRAN, as you'll see in the application materials, is to augment the existing facilities and to plug coverage gaps. And by doing that, we increase processing speed and provide better service to our customers in the area. Essentially, if someone is on a wireless device, any sort of wireless device, They're receiving coverage from, right now, macro facilities in the area. There are two mainly that we address in our radio frequency report. As you enter a coverage zone, your device or a device picks up frequency and functions on that wireless network. You have multiple sources competing for that frequency. And what happens is, as more and more traffic occurs, meaning wireless traffic, so bodies in the zone of frequency, the system degrades and doesn't provide the processing speeds and the capacity that we need in order to function and create a wireless network. These these wireless small cell antennas help offload the larger macro ecosystem. So what happens is you travel through an area where one of these small cell antennas provides coverage. A device will pick up the coverage provided by that pinpointed antenna, and it will offload from the larger macro wireless network. What that does is it allows another user at some other end of that coverage zone to then have better signal. So it offloads capacity and provides very pinpointed wireless signal in specific locations. Utility poles are the perfect foil for a small cell antenna. They're the right height, so anywhere from 20 to 40 feet to provide that low elevation of coverage. They're already in the public right-of-way, so they don't require new construction. We're essentially circumnavigating the need to come in and say to a municipality, we would like to build 5 or 6 or 10 small monopole towers that are 30 feet high, by saying we'd like to install these on existing utility poles. In Milton, so that's the basic reason that we're here, is to provide coverage and fill a capacity gap that we've identified in Milton. In Milton, the dual permitting track that we briefly mentioned at first, when we approach a town, we initially read through the zoning bylaws and try to figure out the path of least resistance, or the path that the town would like us to take to permit one of our facilities, whether it's a macro facility, a small cell facility, what have you. Here, we read in the use regulations in Milton zoning bylaw, so Section 3 and specifically Section 3G, our initial reading of that document and those subparts was that a camouflaged antenna would be permitted by right under the wireless use regulations in Section 3G 3A. We submitted building permit applications which were denied, and that basically triggered a dialogue between Mr. Prondak and myself, and then also the planning department as to how to approach the town. The recommendation was to either appeal the building permit application or applications that we submitted, or appeal the building permit applications submitted and also simultaneously file a special permit to expedite the proceeding into one meeting where we could present the entire CRAN, speak about it, and then ask for zoning relief. My reading of that ordinance, although it hasn't changed, is essentially that Milton could choose to say this is permitted by right. What that would do is it would follow, even though the ordinance may not specifically be drafted for small cell antennas per se, it would provide an expedited path to permitting, which would be in line with federal telecommunications law and possibly provide an ease of use that the town may or may not want in permitting small cell facilities. In lieu of that, if you move down and look at section, subpart 4 of section 3G, that is where the zoning ordinance would then provide an option to use the special permit procedure as the proper vehicle for permitting in Milton. Not here to push on one method or the other. I just bring it to your attention as we've requested 2 different forms of relief independent of each other. With that, I'm happy to answer questions about the proposal. about our interpretation of the zoning bylaw or about any of the special permit materials that we have submitted. So if I can answer your questions.
Let me see if my colleagues have any questions. Mr. Gray?
Yep, I do. I looked at your drawings,
Yes.
and I've read the bylaw and your arguments, okay? It seems to me that in the first hurdle for you to get over is that you have to in order to be able to build this of right and have us overturn Mr. Prondak, and I'd like to hear from you on this in a minute, is that you have to establish that the antenna that you're proposing to install on this pole is camouflaged within the meaning of this bylaw,
Yes.
okay? And can you take us through, also for the folks here, maybe the folks on the television, what exactly this thing looks like?
Yes, absolutely.
Because that to me is absolutely the initial threshold question.
So on all of the plan sets are all very similar.
Yeah.
And on the second page of the plan set, you'll see a diagram and profile of the utility pole. Should we pass these out?
You want to just is there a sheet number you want to, so you're sure we're looking at the same one?
So the second page of the diagram of any plan set, I think that's kind of what I'm referring to, is that they're all structured the same. I'm looking at Milton, Mass. SC 05. On the second page, you'll see a profile of the utility pole and a sketch of a canister antenna on the top of the pole.
Is there, in the lower right-hand corner is the number LE2?
LE2,
Okay,
correct.
go ahead.
So on the left-hand side, so you'll see one color telephone pole, the existing pole as it stands now.
Yep.
And then you'll see a drawing simulating what the canister antenna looks like on the very top of the pole.
So is there any additional material that's attached to the pole besides the antenna?
There is a remote
why don't you
radio. There's a
talk to
remote
us about
radio
that,
head,
yes.
Little metal thing on the, about a third of the way up on the pole?
Yes, so they're commonly mounted between 8 and 12 feet, depending on the utility pole and also on the location. So they're mounted out of reach, essentially, of a normal person. That remote radio head helps transmit the signal processed by the antenna.
So is this antenna connected to, how does the signal get from this antenna from the pole to the network?
Fiber optic cable.
Fiber optic cable that's attached somehow to the pole?
Yes, fiber optic cable is run to the pole, and then it processes back to a backhaul.
Running to the pole underground, or is it attached to the pole, wires on the pole itself? Or
Wires on the pole, and it does depend on the location.
Okay, so you said in your materials and in your presentation that the antenna is camouflaged. I'm paraphrasing whatever I think you're going, because it looks like an electrical transformer.
Yes.
Where are electrical transformers normally mounted on a pole?
They're often side mounted.
Yeah. And
So-
where is your antenna proposed to be installed?
These are top mounted antennas.
Right. So
We do one or the other.
one or the
depending.
other. And are there specific advantages to having the antenna attached on the top of the pole as to the side? Can you talk about that for a bit?
It depends on where the other transmission lines are routed to the pole. So frequently the construction team will attempt to stay away from moving transmission lines if possible.
Okay.
Also, it has to do with the height of the antenna, given the coverage that they're trying to.
So so it would be correct to say that if you were attempting to side mount the antenna on the pole, that it would run into physical interference potentially from the existing wires that were already there, possibly.
It's possible, and it is very site specific, depending on the elevation
Right.
of the wires in that specific geography, even in a municipality. It's not the same, throughout
Okay.
usually.
So would it be easier or safer to maintain in the future for your employees if it were mounted on the top where it's out of the? Does that matter at all?
It's not as much of a safety concern as the line workers are certainly skilled at servicing both types of antenna. Here with the top-mounted antenna, they're top-mounted because of the pole elevation and also because of the signal that we're trying to process.
So if you mount it on the top of the pole, would the residents of the town be able to get better reception because of that?
It's not a pole top versus a pole side reception issue as much as adding an antenna where there is a gap in coverage. So it will innately, either mount will increase reception.
Okay.
Or data coverage.
What I'm trying to drive at is that it's hard for me to see in one sense that a top-mounted antenna of this type, even though it slightly resembles in shape a transformer, you don't mount a transformer on top of a pole. So it's hard for me to say that it's camouflaged in the meaning of this bylaw if it's mounted on top of the pole, because to me it's like it's camouflaged in the same way that sending a soldier to battle in winter where there's snow in a dark uniform. It's on top. It may be it's not exactly suited because transformers aren't on the top of the pole; they're on the side. So what I'm trying to drive at is there some reason why it would be better for the townspeople and users of the Verizon system in the area where the antenna is located? Will they get better service if it's on top? Is it easier to maintain? Is there something that can help us figure out why it would be better to allow it on the top as opposed to the side?
The short answer to that would basically be no. And I understand the point that you're making very clearly. From our perspective, they're camouflaged because they do resemble a transformer in color and shape.
Yeah.
The pole top mount or the side mount is dictated by the radio frequency. So that's why they're located where they are on these particular poles.
If I may, can I
Sure.
footnote that? I think Mr. Valenti.
Mim, if you're
You
going
gotta-
to
you can
come up here.
Again, Betsy Mason, McLean Milton, Woburn office. Two points, one which I'd like to make, and then one which I'd like to invite Mr. Valenti, who is the radio frequency engineer, to make to augment Attorney Lanzetta's responses. First, with regard to top mount versus side mount, that is driven in large part by whoever the electric service provider is, whatever their construction standards are. Here, is it Eversource here or National Grid? So Eversource is, my apologies for not being fully familiar with the file, but Eversource has very particular construction standards, kind of a thick sheaf of them, and for the purpose of answering your questions here, in part, they have prescribed distances between the antennas and the primary transmission line and secondary transmission line. They will, as Attorney Lanzetta pointed out, move lines where possible to accommodate Verizon Wireless. So if it's possible to do a side mount, clearly it looks more like a transformer. In addition, you want to? So where the attachment goes on the pole has a lot to do with what's already there, as Josh said, and also what the utility provider will
Is it
be
fair
able
to
to
say,
do.
I'm sorry to interrupt, is
Yeah,
it fair to
that's
say
fine.
that Eversource would likely prefer, it would be easier for them if it were on top of the pole, it wouldn't cause as much interference with their
It's really a
existing
pole by
laws?
pole, and sorry to run over the end of your sentence, it's really a pole by pole situation.
Okay.
Yeah, except to the extent that it may be, you were going to comment on top versus side mount from an RF benefit point of view.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, you're going to have to
Sure.
identify yourself.
Sure,
Please.
gladly. Keith Valenti with C Squared Systems, business address 65 Dartmouth Drive, Auburn, New Hampshire. And I prepared the RF affidavit dated April 17th. From a network functionality standpoint, certainly on these poles, we're trying to make use as best we can of what's there, as opposed to bringing in, trying to construct anything new in the area. So to the extent we could go higher on a pole, certainly that would allow a little bit better coverage,
Okay.
a broader service area, a little better offload for those macro sites. But as I think we were discussing, there's a lot of factors at play.
Okay.
Mainly driven by the utility company. I think one of the requirements is if there's primary power on the pole, you can't go above it. So I think some of these where there's just secondary, I believe the proposal is to go above.
And each of these, let's talk for a second about pole location, about why these particular poles were chosen. I mean, I think I understand why, but I want it sort of clear for the record that each of these locations probably has, as you said, a coverage gap or additional or significant demands placed upon the amount of service that's available in that area. In other words, some of them are located not too far from where the schools are. There are a lot of kids. Obviously, in the schools there are a lot of kids. But, you know, there may be, certainly during school hours, a large number of smartphones in use that would probably overload or cause the system to degrade in its service capability, because they're all trying to, whatever, use the phones, stream the phones, and the fact that you're adding these. Can you talk a little bit about why these particular locations were chosen? Do you have any more factors on that?
Sure. So at present, the macro sites that we were referring to, those are the traditional either tower or rooftop facilities. Right now, Verizon is located on the Milton Hospital at 92.
Right. Yeah.
So that's basically their one facility in the northern portion of town, serving the bulk of Milton. In addition to that, there are surrounding sites that are part of the network. So there's also one on the Sovereign Bank at 1601 Blue Hill Ave. That's in Mattapan.
Okay.
So those two sites have coverage footprints, areas of service
Yep.
that they're providing today. With the growth in usage that Verizon is seeing in the wireless, and it's just across the board, one of the challenges is to keep up with all that usage and that capacity demand. So what's happening in areas such as Milton and all across the state and elsewhere is there's just too much usage for those macro facilities to keep up with the demand. So Verizon has a whole team dedicated to watching their sites and monitoring performance and so forth. Mm-hmm. And they're always trying to plan for the future and, okay, well, this site's, the usage is going up at this time of day. What's going on here? So these small cells are largely, they're very targeted in what they're trying to serve. They don't cover large areas. They're intended just to cover small little areas. Just not to confuse the board with analogies, but these footprints you can kind of think of as the usage goes, they're just the pressure in that balloon gets higher and higher. So these are almost like relief valves that
because I'm just curious, the range of useful, I think council described it as sort of an antenna room or whatever, a signal room that would be created, an envelope, if you will. How many feet, miles, or what's the useful range of the small area that's being helped out by the kind of, and is it vary from pole to pole probably, but?
Certainly it does vary from pole to pole. One of the challenges with utilizing utility poles is oftentimes they're below the surrounding tree heights. In many cases, surrounding homes may be taller than them. So what you get in terms of coverage is they propagate well up and down streets.
Okay.
Kind of when you have to go through stands of trees, they get eaten up a little more so than a macro site, which is sitting up higher. You can kind of see above all that.
Line of sight's an issue with this, right?
It is. So it's going to vary. If we look at the Milton's, it's small cell 4. The address 133 Center Street. That's located outside Milton Academy. It's more open. It's going to propagate throughout the campus, probably in an area standpoint, probably a much larger area than some of these other locations that are more, surrounded by homes and trees and so forth.
So, if what I'm trying to, let me ask you another question at the moment. If this weren't approved, what would be the alternative to providing more service? The construction of larger towers, you'd have to find some other location if it were even possible within the town. I'm just trying to think what's
Sure.
It seems to me that one of the overall purposes of this bylaw is to try to minimize the visual impact of these things, right? Mm-hmm. So that's why they talk about camouflaging it and trying to hide it or whatever, which is why the Milton Hospital location is great in a sense, is that it's kind of hidden up on top of the roof there. It's disguised. Mm-hmm. Not a lot of visual impact for most of the town. And it seems to me that putting them on the poles like this seems like a pretty good idea. It uses the existing structures available in the town. There's poles all over the place. Most of us drive by, we don't even, they fade into the background generally. I'm speaking for myself. But, so what? I'm gonna say, so one argument would be that the installation of these antennas, this is the type of thing that would be well within sort of the overriding purpose of this bylaw, which is to try to the extent possible, improve the service, but keep these things with a relatively, as low a visual impact as possible. Is that, and so if we weren't able to approve this for some reason, the alternative is likely to result in something that would be either service not as great for us, worse service, that's the word, or something that would be more visually intrusive, possibly. I mean, there's a question there somewhere.
I would say that for me, I mean, and I don't want to overstep, I would say that's
Yeah.
probably very likely. I mean,
Yeah.
these are intended, like, as you mentioned, to use existing utility
Here's the
poles.
question. Based on the existing technology that's available, this is on the scale of high visual impact and low visual impact. Is this more towards the low and visual impact?
This is as low as you can get. As far as visual impact,
Yeah.
we do camouflage power antennas in buildings where appropriate, a church steeple,
Steeples,
for
sure.
example.
Yep.
That brings in another layer of permitting,
Yep.
leasing, dealing with landlords.
Yep.
Whereas here, Verizon has master licensing agreements with the utility companies and licenses to be on the poles, low visual impact, and pinpoint technology. It'll never remove the need for a macro facility. You need both the umbrella or roof of coverage in the house, and then also the finite room of coverage.
Okay.
But also, it is the state of the art. Recently, there's an FCC initiative to roll out and have 5G, have the U.S. be the first nation to have a full 5G network. I'm sure everyone's heard of that, in the course of their daily lives in the news. Maybe wireless nerds are a little more prone to it than others, but the small cell antenna will be the backbone of 5G.
Okay.
So more of these are coming, and the permitting process is very akin to the macro sites now, where there is a expeditious element to getting these permitted.
One more question, I think, then I should yield the floor. I'm sorry for going on so long. If we were to approve this as a camouflage device, so that you could build them as of right, is it your position that would mean that you would no longer, that Mr. Pronto could just issue the permits for them, right? And we would not have to have the Board of Appeals involved anymore?
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
One of you? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I think
Go ahead.
If you were to overturn my decision initially, then they would then have to go to the
Telecommunications design
The
review.
design review.
get approved
Okay.
there, and then I could issue the permits.
Yes.
Okay, so there would still be some level of review about citing, and I should know the answer to the question, since I sit on that committee too, but for the record, I wanted to get it out there. Yeah, that was
In
it.
the bylaw, if it was permitted by right,
Yeah,
it would be a building permit application, which then it would be filed, and then it's my understanding, and please correct me, Mr. Conrad, if I'm wrong, it would go to a design review committee
okay,
for approval, and upon their review and approval,
Then
it
the
would go back to
permit
Mr. Prondak, permit would be issued, and then these also require an electrical permit as well, because the nature of this work is it's electrical.
right. Okay, that's all I have for now.
I think we all know why Mr. Gray is a member of the Telecommunications Committee.
You asked me.
Ms. O'Donnell, please.
My problem with the argument about camouflage, whether it's camouflage, is that looking at our bylaw, it really seems to be directed towards real camouflaging, like hiding it in, on the side of a chimney and painting it like brick, the way they do in East Milton and that sort of other locations. So I'm not so sure that this design sort of fits the camouflage wireless telecommunications facility definition in our particular bylaw, which may be, somewhat antiquated in terms of the advances in technology.
It's our experience that because this, again, it's not a brand new technology, but it is new in the Commonwealth, that many zoning bylaws have not many wireless bylaws that we encounter were written for macro or lattice towers from 25 years ago and
Yeah.
don't even reflect updates for monopoles, let alone a low elevation small cell antenna mounted in the public right of way. I believe, I understand what you're saying about how this is drafted for camouflage antenna. I think that it turns on what the definition of structure is, which was absent in the bylaw. So there is some interpretation there. Regardless of whether, our position is that it is a camouflage antenna resembling an electric transformer. So I believe you could read that into the bylaw.
I'm not so, really not so convinced about that, because it does talk about an existing or a proposed structure, and it's supposed to look like an architectural component. I'm not so sure that, I'm not sure of the case law, but I don't think, utility poles are defined as structures, but maybe they are in some cases. But so I'm not really convinced of the notion about the camouflaged. I would certainly support the idea of the special permit.
And that's where we would naturally progress to
Yeah.
here under section 4.
That's it.
I just have one very basic question, and I'd like you to answer it in the least technical jargon that we can. But we have 5 poles, and you've got coverage gaps, which we're trying to cure by this set of antennas. How bad are the coverage gaps as they exist now? And then, will there be any coverage gaps if the antennas are installed? Could you just make that comparison for me in something that I can understand without all kinds of numbers and charts and graphs?
I can try. So
Is it the same for each pole, or does it differ for different areas?
yeah, the poles themselves that are proposed, the equipment and the functionality of them are the same for all intents and purposes for each one. It's a somewhat of a difficult question to determine how bad the service is today and what the degree it
What's
will
the
improve.
standard, and what is the readings, for example, in this area?
So-
Are there industry standards as to what you should be?
Well, Verizon has a link budget effectively, which is a sort of an allowance of how much signal loss can you live with before it gets to the user device, such that that user device has a reliable connection back to the network. So in this case, we have to look at it from both a coverage standpoint and a capacity standpoint. And the reason I say that is as your coverage degrades, that breeds capacity problems simply because all the users are sharing the same resource from that macro site. The ones that suffer are the ones on the outer fringe of coverage in those marginal or less than reliable coverage areas. So for instance, we were talking about the Milton Academy. You have this kind of isolated area with a lot of usage. So being that that area is kind of on a fringe of coverage, one of the reasons we're located there is to kind of absorb the usage from that limited area. In doing so, it improves the service for all those other users that are using the same macro site resources. So I don't know that I answered that question as you intended. But the coverage will improve. It varies from time of the day. The more users that are on the system, everyone's going to
Atmospheric
suffer more.
conditions and everything else.
New Year's Eve, good luck. It's just the way it is. So, Verizon has to plan for that as best they can and monitor traffic trends and at the end of the day, they start proposing these sort of solutions to best handle that.
So are you telling us that, assuming we take your opinions on faith, because that seems to be the way it is, unless we're going to listen to engineers all night, are these 5 poles and the antennas, are they the only poles and antennas in Milton that you're going to need in order to properly operate Verizon's network? Or are you going to go around to other sections of the town and look for additional places to put antennas?
Right now, so Verizon essentially evaluates their coverage in real time on a daily basis. They create propagation maps, and then they find the pinpointed location where they think that the antenna will best serve the gap that they've identified. We can only evaluate it, unfortunately, we have to evaluate it today. It's very hard to forecast in a place like Milton, where you're just south of an enormous metropolitan area, highly populated, some large interstates running nearby, so a lot of vehicular traffic in and out of surrounding communities. It's almost impossible to predict. I can't say that we won't be here in 3 months or 8 months saying, you're growing, more capacity, devices are getting more sophisticated, needing more capacity. It's exceptionally hard to predict. So
To the best of your present knowledge, these are the 5 you need at the present time.
Presently, the locations we've selected and the 5 that we proposed solve the coverage gap that we've identified.
Okay, I just have one more question, and that is, are these antennas that you're proposing to put up, are they solely and exclusively for Verizon clients and Verizon use? You're not going to co-locate other companies on these devices?
Correct. They're just for Verizon.
Not enough room, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not enough room, and the companies, each of the kind of the 4 major carriers that we all hear about the most, operate on different spectrum. So the antennas operate.
Do the 4 other companies, which will go nameless here, do they use this technology as well and site these antennas on telephone poles? Is that the modus operandi?
There is a movement right now for this. I can't speak to what we represent only Verizon Wireless at our law firm. I can't speak to what they are doing, but these will be the backbone of 5G in the United States.
Okay.
There are, sorry to answer your question, I know that we've approved on the Telecommunications Design Review Committee, some other type, and I know I'm not an expert in this, right? Some other type of antenna that's very small, that's not doing the kind of capacity they were talking about, but those are pole mounted, and I recall I think they're in a section of town where there's a coverage gap. I want to say they're Blue Hillish, somewhere around the backside south side of Blue Hill, in that area, maybe a little bit on 28. They're lower visual impact. They don't have the same level of capacity, I assume, because they're smaller. And they're more targeted, but they would not accomplish, I don't think, what Verizon's trying to do.
Mr. Lantana, do you have anything else you'd like to add at the present time, knowing we're not going to foreclose you from saying anything?
Just very briefly, I would just ask the board to consider, when looking at either a building permit application process under the current draft of the zoning bylaws, or a special permit application process under the current version of the zoning bylaws, would ask to just evaluate the speed and efficiency of each process. And the reason I point this out one more time is just that the building permit application process would be a relatively expedited and seamless process, given the trend and likely imminent FCC order directing small cell activity this summer. I think that you could interpret your zoning bylaw to provide an expedited procedure here, while still reviewing these locations on a location-by-location basis with your design review committee, without undertaking a huge redraft of your bylaw. In the alternative, I believe that there are clear parameters for a special permit process as well. I think the special permit process, although slightly more arduous, it's the same result. So not pushing in one direction or the other, but we just ask you to consider the expedited nature already provided for in your bylaws.
Great, thank you very much. We have a building commissioner, Joseph Prondak, here. Do you want to be heard, Mr. Prondak?
I do, Mr. Lewis.
Good, welcome to the Board of Appeals.
Thank you. My name is Joe Prondak. I'm the building commissioner for the town of Milton. And so essentially, I have a little bit of a dilemma. We have a bylaw that basically provides 2 paths for cell phone antennas, either as a matter of right on an existing structure, provided that it's camouflaged as it's determined by the Wireless Telecommunications Design Review Committee, or by special permit from the Board of Appeals, subject to special terms and conditions. Where I struggled with this decision is whether or not to consider the utility poles as structures as was intended in the bylaw when it was written, or in the context of the bylaw. And quite simply, I felt that I had to take the conservative approach, and I did have discussion with Attorney Brandon Moss from Town Council's office, Murphy, S.C. Toomey Lane. And we were of the opinion that these may very well constitute new freestanding wireless telecommunications facilities as opposed to facilities mounted on an existing structure. So taking the conservative approach, that's how I arrived at my decision, in knowing that this technology was likely not around when the bylaw was written and not considered when the bylaw was written. And had it been around, I think it would have been considered and would have been addressed. So again, I, after having discussions with Mr. Lanzetta, and prior to Mr. Lanzetta applying, there was another gentleman directly from Nexius that I talked to about this a little bit, and he explained a little bit about especially the Milton Academy site and the gap in coverage there. So it does seem to me that there's a possibility that Verizon would be looking for more of these sites, but certainly I would think that some of the other major carriers would be proposing this down the road, and I'd be facing the same dilemma. So in some respects, unfortunately for Verizon, they were the first. So again, my decision was simply based on taking a conservative approach and saying that existing utility poles do not constitute or do not qualify as existing structures as was intended in the bylaw, and that was my position.
And Mr. Brandon Moss did not provide you with any written
He did not.
opinions of the
No,
firm?
this was a verbal conversation,
Okay.
phone conversation.
Okay. Do you have anything else you'd like to add, Mr. Prondak?
I do not. I think it sums it up. I think I'm just trying to keep it that simple.
Okay. Does any of my colleagues have any questions for Mr. Prondak?
Well, I guess I actually do.
Ms. O'Donnell.
In that, I mean, if this is sort of the new kind of technology, thinking about it as a process issue for the town, do we want to be having a special permit process for every single one of these little tiny antennas?
That's
that we're
good for
gonna-
5 years and then has to be renewed?
Exactly.
That seems like a very cumbersome process to me.
I agree.
You have 5 antennas today from Verizon, they may need 20 more when 5G comes in, or I'm just pulling numbers out of an air, and they'll all be on slightly different timetables based on when they were approved. It would be
Yeah,
a
you'd be
lot of
doing-
work for the Board of Appeals.
You'd be doing it every
We'd be
Yeah.
meeting a lot and renewing them every 5 years, and you guys having to keep track of when the renewals are up, and then what happens when it's late, and a headache for you as well.
Yep.
I'm not saying we maybe have authority to be able to get around that problem, I'm not sure yet, but that's, I think, what would happen if we use the special permit process.
Okay.
Right.
If I just might add, if you were to overturn my decision, I would use that as guidance for any future
Right.
application for it as well.
And you wouldn't be disappointed in the Board of Appeals by doing
Not
that?
that as Mr. Lanzetta said, I take no position either way.
Okay, folks, so we're now at that stage of the proceedings where the applicants have put in their case, so to speak. And so what we're going to do here is take each of these locations, and we're going to deal with that specifically. So, for example, the first location we're going to deal with is 122 Decker Street.
No, it's not.
What is it?
It got switched out to 283 Blue Hills Parkway.
283, oh, okay. I've got Mr. Lancetta's
Yeah.
letter. Blue Hills Park. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, now with respect to that particular pole at 283 Blue Hill Parkway, is there anybody present, because all of the abutters have particular rights for each of these particular poles, and we want to make sure everyone has the right to be heard. So with respect to this one, 283 Blue Hill Parkway, is there anyone present tonight who has any questions of Mr. Lanzetta or any of the officials. Yes, sir.
Yes, do you want to come forward?
You're going to have to come forward because the microphone won't pick you up back there.
Thank you.
So don't you tell us your name and address?
My name is Harvey Cohen, 283 Blue Hills Parkway. And
What a surprise,
and
Mr. Cohen.
37-14 is a number I've memorized for decades. Why? I'm not...
Welcome to the board, Mr. Cohen.
Thank you. I have no objections to what they're doing, what they want to do. I like the idea. I don't think there's anything they can do to make this pole uglier or prettier than it is. Although I fondly miss the previous pole, which was one of the 1890 poles, and cops were looking for it to fall or being hit down. But I don't think these people researched their locations properly. This is one of the most problematic locations in the town of Milton for 3 reasons. Number one, it's located approximately 12, 15 feet from Blue Hill Parkway and directly on Decker Street. That intersection of Decker and Blue Hill Parkway and a block away have a accident every single week, a serious one every single month, and one that affects my property every year. Could be a falling lamppost from the parkway coming down, could be a car on the property, and 16 and a half years ago, there was a fatal, and one of the vehicles landed about 5 or 6 feet from that pole. My concern, that's the first of the 3 issues of this pole. My concern is that as short a life expectancy of this piece of electronics that you think, you said 5 years? Is that correct?
That would be the
No,
special
the permit would be for 5
Permit,
years.
I'm sorry, I apologize. Whatever their useful life is, it may not be the same as the useful life of that pole. The second issue, so there is the danger for some car hitting it. The second issue is the danger on Decker Street. There tends to be an accident the first snowstorm before the salt comes down. Now, my fence has been taken out countless times since I moved in as a teenager in 1963. Usually, the next lamppost stops the car from taking out the whole fence. One time, I was lucky, missed the pole completely and took out the whole side of the fence, whipped around and took it off. So it's a target. It hasn't been knocked down. The argument is that previous pole stayed upright since 1890 and Olmsted's Parkway construction. The third thing is an annoyance. The reason I know 37-14 is because I have been at the engineering department a few times in the last couple months, practically every year since the gentleman retired who regularly cleaned out the catch basin. Now, I know about the $36 increase add-on to pay for the catch basins. That's a nice getting around 2.5. That's not why I'm here. My point is this. The previous man before he retired knew that Decker Street and Lothrop Street came down a hill. They washed all the sand, and mine was the catch basin, which is a foot to 2 feet away from this pole. That catch basin fills up the street to over both sidewalks on both sides. So it's a pond there every time it rains. And it takes till the next day for it to drain completely. I have asked repeatedly. I'm told that all the catch basins are on a 3-year clean-out basis. And this one should be cleaned twice a year because of the amount of sand that is washed down. It's not. It fills. The street is literally dangerous within feet of where there was a fatality. So as much as I like your idea, you should have asked somebody in the neighborhood how bad that location was. It is. And good luck. Do you have any questions for me?
I don't, Mrs. O'Donnell.
Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot one other thing. The pole, the light pole, every tree that was planted on the parkway by the MDC has been knocked down by accidents coming across the parkway over there. The pole gets knocked down every 3 or 4 years, and when the light goes out, do you know how difficult it is to convince the electric company that it's their responsibility to change a light bulb on a state highway? The last one that went out was some years ago, maybe 3 years ago. It took 4 months of calls, weekly calls, to get it changed, and it got changed because a selectman in this town was gracious enough to make a call for me. So, you picked a nice target, okay? And I like your idea, okay?
Thank you for coming, Mr. Cohen.
My pleasure, thank you
We
for
ask you,
listening.
be very careful when you're going home. And
My house is well enough insulated with land so it's not been hit. With all these interactions, it's not been hit, where others on the street, on Decker Street, have been hit, okay? It's a tight little cattle path.
stay safe.
Thank you very much for listening.
Now, is there anybody else on the 283 Blue Hill Avenue application who has any questions of the applicant? Is there anybody at this, regarding that application, who wants to speak in support of Mr. Lanzetta's position, let's say? Is there anybody who wishes to speak in opposition to the application at 283 Blue Hill Avenue?
Blue Hills Parkway.
Oh, I'm sorry, Blue Hills Parkway. Okay, so there's no such person present. The second application is 134 Blue Hill Avenue. Now, is there anybody present this evening who has any questions regarding that particular application? Is there anybody present who wants to speak in support of the application at 134 Blue Hill Avenue? Is there anybody present this evening who wishes to speak in opposition to the application at 134 Blue Hill Avenue? So the record will indicate there's no such person present. We'll go to 133 Center Street in Milton. Is there any person present who has any questions with respect to the 133 Center Street application? And the record will indicate there's no person present. Is there anybody present who wishes to speak in support of this application at 133 Center Street? And there is no such person. Is there anyone present who wishes to speak in opposition to the application as it relates to 133 Center Street? And there is no such person present. The next application, it's number 4, is Brook and Central Avenues in Milton. Is there anybody present this evening who has any questions for the applicant regarding that particular application? Yes, sir. Why don't you come on up and make yourself comfortable?
How is everybody tonight?
We're doing fine. What's your name and
My
address?
name is Chris Grant. I live at 434 Brook Road, which is on the corner of Brook Road and Central Avenue.
Good. Welcome to the Board of Appeals, Mr. Grant.
Thank you. I guess my question is, which pole in that area are we looking at to put this antenna?
Mr. Lanzetta, can you show Mr. Grant?
Drawing right here, it's called Verizon, or VZ56. So illustrated right here in this circle.
I guess, could I borrow your glasses again? I'm sorry. I forgot to bring
Full
mine.
service board.
Okay, so this is the pole. It sits right on the corner of Brook Road and Central Ave, right in front of my house, on the corner. Okay. A couple of different things that I'd like to bring to your attention, and going by the conversations that I was listening to earlier, it seemed to me that having these things on the poles themselves, it's better if it's in a more open area, not around trees. Is that accurate?
I think to address Mr. Valente's comment about that, it's, what we were talking about is the different elevations where these poles sometimes are lower than the tree canopy, or possibly homes in the surrounding area, to provide more of a blanket coverage. But that's not their intent. The intent of these antennas is to focus an azimuth in a specific direction. These antennas are omnidirectional, so for streets where we try to use them in the public right-of-way, they're directing signal essentially up and down the street. You get signal byproduct going perpendicular to that in other directions, but we are trying to direct specifically signal up and down the streets. So tree canopy is an issue for the larger, Keith would be able to address this a little bit more articulately than me, but
Okay.
it's not that it's degrading the signal to a point where we don't want to use it.
Well, just to give you a little insight on the telephone, that telephone pole itself, and Mr. Cohen, I believe?
Yes.
Sir? The same kind of a situation applies with accidents at that corner. I don't know if anybody's done any kind of, take a look over the last 50 to 60 years and how many times that pole's been flipped out because someone comes down Reedsdale Road and tries to make that corner, and they take that pole out. So that's one issue that you're going to run into. I think that you might want to take into consideration. Number two, is there any reason why it has to be on that side and it can't be on any one other corner, and specifically more towards the school? The school is an open area. There's plenty of, I would say, probably access points for such an antenna, maybe even on top of the school. You have one on, you're saying you got antennas on the hospital, you've got them on a bank. I mean, why couldn't we put some kind of an apparatus on the school? And it seems to me that when you talk about the influx of usage of the cellular signal, it's probably, if I'm guessing here, I'm thinking during the school hours, I think as this gentleman, I'm sorry, I forgot your name, sir.
Gray.
Mr. Gray.
Mr. Gray had mentioned that when the kids are in school, there's probably a bigger influx of what's going on. So I think, why couldn't the school area be utilized instead of having it on that telephone pole?
So we certainly do building mounted antennas. It's something that we are constantly pursuing. We're trying to establish a network of small cell antennas to fill the coverage gap in Milton, which is why we're proposing this elevation in this location to fill the coverage gap. Public buildings, rooftop installations are a very different installation than a utility pole installation. They pose a whole separate set of issues for Verizon generally, from the RFP process, meaning the bidding process, to securing the lease, the landlord. You run it with schools in particular, run into issues of, is the roof structurally, is it sound, how old is it, is the roof okay? There are just a lot of issues that go along with rooftop installations.
Access too, right?
Access for
Well,
repair.
get the Procurement Act issue, you've got to,
You do have a
Right.
RFP issue that
Yeah.
can take time. It's not to say there's something that's out of the question, but it's just not within the parameters of what we're trying to do now with the small cell antennas.
Right, but I mean, I guess the point here is that, you made the comment as the town grows and more people start using more, devices and so forth and so on, wouldn't we want to think to the future of having that capacity fulfilled some way, somehow, and by using, a bigger apparatus or something that's more stronger in a different area, that maybe, a rooftop of that sort on a brand-new school that was just put in place over the last few years would be a sound area to, to look at. It doesn't even look like it was considered. It's more of a, hey, there's the pole, it's already a structure in place, we throw it up, it's not going to cost us as much to do it, it's going to fill the gap that we need, but not considering the future of what potentially could come down the road as far as number. And then coming back again, going through the same process of adding more of these little antennas, or maybe even having to go to a bigger antenna at some point in time someplace. I mean, I think we would want to look at that.
Can you describe a little bit the size and scope of the installation that would occur on a roof like the one at Milton Hospital?
Sure. And I'm not an engineer,
But just so that because I think I know the answer to his question, but I don't want to be the one to answer it, I think.
we usually, with building with rooftop installations, it's usually a macro facility, so it involves panel antennas, which are very large. It involves securing a lease, and it also involves substantial construction. To be able to, we have to do a structural assessment to make sure that we can actually get the facility up to snuff, the local building department. And then also, we have access issues with buildings, which is one of the large issues that you have, where Verizon does very routine maintenance and checkups on all of their antennas, whether it's a tower, a small cell facility, whether it's a drive-by or an actual check where they're going through equipment. So there are large access issues with buildings as well.
So in other words, even with these little antennas on the poles, they still gonna have to come and service them on a regular basis, that kind of a thing?
They'll do a, like, they might drive past to just check them out. All the facilities are handled that way.
Oh, you know, and then my other concern here is also the camouflage issue. This looks like, to me, it's gonna be, whatever it is, a 2-foot extension of that pole sticking up above the tree line and so forth and so on in front of my property, which I'm not overly pleased with. So if there's any way that the board would, you know, consider moving this thing to a different location within the same area. I mean, but again, I think looking at something over towards the school, it's open, there's no trees. These 2 trees in front of my house are huge. I mean, I've been taking care of them. The family's been there since 1960, so I know how long they've been around and taking care of them, so.
Thank you, Mr. Grant.
That's it for me.
Thank you very much. Mr. Lanzetta, is there any way that Mr. Grant's request that the pole, that the antenna be side-mounted on that pole, is that a serious issue at that particular location or not?
It is an issue, yes.
Yes.
What we're proposing here are top-mounted for a reason because of the elevation of the transmission lines currently and the other risers that are attached to the pole.
Okay.
And also, these poles go through, just if I can address the safety concern with the poles that were raised by the other 2 presenters. These poles go through a rigorous structural assessment by the power company that owns them before they're approved for license with Verizon Wireless. So there is a structural assessment, and the equipment that's mounted on these poles is exceptionally lightweight. So in the event of a pole coming down, these are very lightweight. They're less than a common electric transformer weighs. So at 33 pounds for the antenna and roughly 55 pounds for the remote radio head.
And so you've already done that for?
Yes, those are done before we go to permitting. Structural assessment is done as per the master licensing agreement.
Great. Thank you very much. Very much. Thank you, Mr. Grant, for being present and speaking. Let me ask, with respect to the application number 4 at Brook and Central Avenues in Milton, is there anybody present who'd like to speak in support of that application?
I have questions.
You have a question? Sure.
Yes, so to follow on to Mr. Grant.
Sure, come on up. Why don't you tell us your name and address?
Sure, it's Marianne Spillane McInturf, and I live at 374 Central Avenue, close to the Brook and Central intersection.
How do you spell your last name, ma'am?
Sure, it's Spillane, S-P-I-L-L-A-N-E.
Yep.
McInturf is M-C-I-N-T-U-R-F.
Just like it sounds.
Just like it sounds.
Welcome to the Board of Appeals.
Thank you very much. I have 2 questions. One is more of an information gathering, since I'm not a cell tower person, nor do I know the industry that well. And then listening to the Board of Appeals processes, something that you might want to consider in the future when you're considering your special permitting versus opening the floodgates to these canister towers coming into our town. My first question is in regards to these canister antennas, and if the purpose of, let's see, how do I word this? Will the macro towers in our town, I think you had mentioned we have 2 on top of a hospital and a bank. If there were the construction of more macro towers in more wide open spaces, say the Blue Hills, where there are many trees, and the spirit of the bylaw is where you could really camouflage another macro tower, would that take the burden off of the canisters? Or I guess, if you put 3 macro towers in the Blue Hills, would they service and get rid of the need to have micro antenna or canister antennas around the town? Did I ask the question correctly? Okay.
If I can answer.
Please.
So adding more macro towers would provide more overall coverage. But the short answer is that no, the small cell antennas are providing pinpointed coverage, there are specifically identified locations where Verizon wants to add coverage to fill a coverage gap, but also to provide more wireless frequency in that very specific geography. So they work with each other, but then also independently of each other. And then to address the camouflage issue, camouflaging, I understand what you're saying, where, if there's a tree canopy of 60 feet, maybe an average tree canopy, and you have a 100-foot tower, you're covering the first 60 feet of the tower, but it's a little bit of a misnomer to camouflage a tower that's a macro site is going to naturally, the intent of a macro site is to go above a tree canopy and get out from any obstruction, or to minimize any obstruction. So, slight misnomer, say that it would be more camouflage and more in a location with more trees.
Yep. I'm just wondering if it's a cost issue where you would take one of these macro sites, right, and put it in an area that was well wooded, that looks like a tree that would serve. I mean, I'm trying to get it. These are probably cheaper for you to install than doing another macro tower possibly, but for the town to consider the look, the feel, where they're located, is something, that the Board of Appeals will need to consider. My particular concern on Central and Brook, other than, health issues, which I'm sure the Federal Communications FCC has, passed, and none of our Board of Appeals brought up. If this was in front of your house, what would your concerns be?
Pretty much is this one.
It's
Block away,
yeah.
as it turns out.
So if you open the floodgates to, you're one competitor in a field of telecommunications service providers, 5 years from now, on this telephone pole, we could have, or in the general vicinity, 6, one may not look bad, but 6 from several different service providers in the same place, probably would make a visual impact and not a positive one. So that's more for the board to consider when you're considering putting special permits in, or having, let's just let anybody come in and put a canister up.
Yeah, there would still be, even if we were to approve based on the use of right under 3A, saying it's a structure and it's camouflaged and so it's allowed as of right, there would still be review by the Telecommunications Design Review Committee for exactly the issues that you're talking about.
For each and every request that comes over the transom?
Yes.
Okay.
The other thing I should mention to you, we've had matters before the board dealing with cell towers in the area of the Blue Hills. And number one, the Blue Hills is essentially state land.
State-owned,
And,
right.
and they won't allow cell towers out there. And the Friends of the Blue Hills, who do a wonderful job doing work that the state doesn't have funding to do, and to cleaning trails and all of that, are extraordinarily protective of any cell towers that can be seen from the Blue Hills.
Of course.
And so those are really hot-button issues where it may sound like it's an obvious and reasonable solution, but those constituencies are very active and very strong.
Absolutely, as they should be, and so are the residents when, you're looking to put a tower on a burdened pole in a burdened intersection that has similar traffic burdens as, everybody here in the room can understand.
I hear you.
So
Fine.
I kindly ask that you consider that, and following on Chris Grant's request to move that across the street to the public schools grounds, which is, public land and has public telephone poles up and down that street, which is still on Central Avenue. Is there a particular reason why it has to be on that corner?
It's the best location to fill that coverage gap. It's that pinpointed of a technology.
And that's just for Verizon users?
Yes. Because all carriers work on different frequencies.
Have you done a cost analysis on your customer? In other words, the revenue that's going to be generated if you put these 5 towers in? And are you privy to that information and can share that with us?
I am not privy to that information. basically, it comes down to identifying a coverage gap and then filling the gap. That's how we do this.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you.
We're still on Brook and Central Avenues. Is there anybody else who'd like to be heard on that particular application? And there's no such person present.
I would, thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see you back there.
My name's Nick, last name's Lind, L-I-N-D, at 383 Central. I just like to echo a couple of things that Mr. Grant said about that intersection. Just last Saturday, there was another accident there. Cars are constantly flying through. It just doesn't seem to me like the most logical place to put just one more thing that could go wrong or could break. And, you know, on the other side of Brook, echoing what everyone else has said, we have the high school, or the middle school rather. We have telephone poles there. Move it down 2 houses, put it across the street. I mean, think about, would you want one more thing in front of your house? I don't think any of us do, right? That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Lind.
Thank you.
We appreciate you coming tonight. All right, is there anybody else who'd like to ask any questions on Brook and Central Avenues? Okay, there's no such person. Is there anybody present who wants to speak in support of Verizon's application at Brook and Central Avenues? And there's no such person present. Is there anybody present who wishes to speak or be heard or recorded in opposition to this particular application? Okay, so we have 2. Okay, well, hold on one second. We've had 3 people speak, and they speak in opposition, and there are 2 additional people who want to speak in.
We wanted to go across the street with the middle school as well.
Okay, so.
And as a lifelong Verizon person, I've never had any coverage issues.
Yeah.
Right there.
Okay. And may I have your name and address, ma'am?
It's Whelan, W-H-E-L-A-N, and I'm at 384 Central Ave.
And sir?
Gary Lind, 387 Central Avenue.
Great, thank you for being recorded. Our 5th application is 4 Annapolis Road. Is there anyone who wishes to be heard on the application at 4 Annapolis Road? And no person is present. Is there any person present who wishes to speak in support of Verizon's application at 4 Annapolis Road? And there's no such person present. Is there anybody who'd like to be recorded in opposition to the application at 4 Annapolis Road? Okay, so there's no such person present. Mr. Lanzetta, I think we're about to close the evidence in this hearing. Do you have anything else you'd like to add and maybe address yourself to the 3 residents who spoke in opposition to the Brook and Central Avenue
I'll say
issues?
just one very quick moment to echo my sentiment from before. The equipment that's mounted on these poles is very lightweight. It represents no extraordinarily different power need than what is currently on the pole. So we're not adding extra voltage, extra power. We're using what is there already. So from a safety concern, if a pole comes down due to an accident, which is fully out of our control, out of anyone's control, the equipment on the pole represents no safety issue. As far as if equipment were to come down, as far as replacement or getting the equipment up and running again, Verizon does have a storied track record of immediate response to fix their equipment. In fact, we'd probably be ready to fix it and get it back up and running before the utility company can even get to the pole.
Do you know how long it would usually take a utility company to replace a pole like that? That had
You
been
know,
knocked down?
I don't. I know that if it's a huge catastrophe, it usually is, pretty instantaneous, but to clean up wires at least, and then
Sure.
maybe, get a temp pole before they bury another one. But I couldn't actually tell you how many days it might take. But from our perspective, there really is no safety concern to mounting this equipment. Structural analysis is done by licensed engineers before licenses are issued to even go try to get a permit to do this. And we cannot control traffic patterns and potential accidents, unforeseen accidents in the future. As far as pole location, I believe that Verizon has met their burden under federal telecommunications law. We've shown a gap, we've identified it clearly, and we've proposed a reasonable solution to fill the gap. And under the Telecommunications Act of 1996, that is our burden and only our burden to prove. So I believe that we've clearly done that with the materials that we have submitted, and that the board, or I would recommend or ask the board to evaluate those materials in our application for those parameters. So identification of a coverage gap and the ability to quickly permit a wireless antenna to fix or fill that coverage gap.
Thank you, Mr. Lanzetta.
you very
That's, Mr. Prondak, are you all set?
I am all set, sir.
Okay, so we're going to call to, excuse me, I'm suffering from a cold here. We're going to end the evidence at the hearing. Thank everybody for their presentations and for appearing here. And it's our obligation to discuss this application in open session and vote on it, and we intend to do that here and now. Mr. Gray, you've led the discussion. Why don't you lead the discussion?
Lead off. Thank you so much, Mr. Meyer. I'll do my best. As folks have been talking, I've been listening and also trying to read 3A of the bylaw to try to figure out if there's a way we can fit this within what you're asking for primarily, which is, I mean, ideally, you want the antenna approved one way or the other if you can, whether it's through the special permit process or whether it's as of right. Either way, I think this particular technology it makes sense to me. I think it's a very it's a low visual impact way to accomplish improving the service in a targeted area. The alternative of building a larger antenna structure on the top of another building is going to require a much larger capital investment. All the access problems and maintenance problems. I believe there's like auxiliary power that has to be provided to keep it going. In terms of being able to provide better service for the townspeople of Milton for their cell phones, I mean, this seems like a better way to go. The question is, can we fit it within the existing bylaw under 3A as a use of right, or do we have to go with a special permit to approve it? And that's what I'm trying to struggle with, Mr. Leonard. I'm interested to hear your view on it as well.
Okay, Ms. O'Donnell, do you want to be heard?
Well, I was sort of looking at the specs on the installation. I mean, we're talking about an antenna that says that it's 12 inches wide and 38 inches high, which is pretty small. And it actually seems to pretty much match the dimensions of the pole. So you could sort of argue, I suppose, that it's camouflage because it's made to appear as an architectural component of the existing or proposed structure.
I'm not uncomfortable going in that direction because it's basically an extension of the pole.
Right.
It's adding 3-ish feet.
Yeah.
To the top of the pole,
right,
to a structure that's there already. It doesn't require any additional tower to be built within the town. It doesn't require. I think of all the various ways to add a cell phone tower, cell phone coverage within a town, within an area, the visual impact of this method is probably the least. It's the least that I'm aware of, and not that I'm an expert, but of the ones that I've seen. You know, you can hide them inside a pole, but then there's that giant flagpole-like structure that's down at the
Right.
VFW on Granite. It's I believe, a competing carrier. I don't think it's.
Yeah, no,
But that's, you know, that's recently had some work on it. It sticks out like a white sore thumb.
yeah.
But back to your point, I mean, I'm just reading the text of the bylaw. If you can construct I'm paraphrasing, you can construct the antenna, any person shall be permitted to construct or locate a wireless telecommunications facility in any zoning district if such facility is entirely concealed within the existing structure. Okay, no, it's not. So it doesn't fit into that. Or attached to any existing structure but camouflaged thereon. So the first question, is a pole a structure? Well, what else is it if it's not a structure? There's land, there's a right-of-way, and there's something built on it. My deck is a structure. It's made out of wood, has pole-like things in it. You could, I think, arguably, the telephone pole is a structure. I don't know what else it would be. It's a structure that stands straight up. If you built a communications tower that had, you know, feet, I mean, that's a structure. It's just using the poles that have been around since the 1890s or earlier, right? I mean, most people, I mean, I'm trying to think, most people driving by, you know, I pay a little attention to telephone poles because I'm a, you know, whatever, because I'm like, I can see them. But they're there. They're existing. They tend to fade into the background, except when you drive a car into the middle of them. Right? Then you know they're there. But trying to balance the overall intent of this bylaw, which is I think I would sum it up to say it's trying to foster excellent cell phone reception in the town of Milton for the lowest amount of visual impact. And I think that this particular system that they're proposing moves us along in that direction, right? And so when I looked at this originally this morning over a cup of coffee, I was thinking, well, it's a can on top of the pole. You don't put it's that camouflaged. I was sort of focusing on that. It could go either way. I think it's close enough. It does look like the other stuff that's mounted on the pole, which is the transformer. A transformer has wires coming out of it, but I don't think I want to go to the extent of saying, hey, Verizon, can you add a bunch of wires sticking onto this thing so it looks like a transformer? I mean, that's less helpful.
Yeah.
I've seen some of the attempts to make them look like trees.
Those are horrible.
Those are not always very successful. So where am I going with this? I could sleep at night trying to, you know, putting them in as of right. I think there's enough wiggle room in the bylaw for us to do that. But I'm pending. I'd like to hear what the rest of you, you know, the other members of the board have to say on it. But that's what I'm saying. I'm sort of leaning towards that direction, towards thinking it's okay. All right.
My view of this is that I have absolutely no doubt that a pole is a structure under the terms of the bylaw. We have this antenna that's proposed to be put there. The antenna looks like an electrical power transformer. Whether it was made that way intentionally to camouflage it or what wasn't, it doesn't look like an antenna. It looks like something that it isn't. It is an antenna, it looks like a power transformer, and there are power transformers all over the place. So I honestly don't understand, when you look at the bylaw, I'm not sure, I didn't research this issue, but I don't think you go back to 1938 and you see what the provision of the bylaw said, and you say, well, we have to interpret it as things were in 1938, and there's new technology and the bylaw hasn't been amended. That seems to me to be kind of silly. The issue is we have this bylaw. It's applicable. It was applicable when it was adopted. Whenever this section was adopted, I really don't know at the present time. But we apply it in terms of what is happening today. And if it doesn't fit with what's happening today, then the town meeting gets together and they amend it. They upgrade it. They revitalize it. Call it what you will. So just because we didn't have antenna transmission devices back when this was passed, to me, is not indicative of what the intent of the bylaw is. Here, I think that this does fit within the intent of the bylaw. It fits within the verbiage of the bylaw. And to me, it makes consummate sense that that this type of application, and there are going to be many of them, is really better handled by the Telecommunications Committee than it is by a bunch of lawyers on the Board of Appeals who wouldn't know what this device is if I saw it outside on the pole. I mean, we can discuss the federal law, and we can discuss what it requires to get a special permit and all of that. And one thing I should say to the folks present here, and Mr. Lanzetta's been very kind. He hasn't made the argument that federal law takes precedence over our bylaws here, and that if we started directing Verizon as to where the coverage gap is best to be cured, or tell it to put it on some other pole when there's no evidence that that would be effective, and we have evidence here that these are the effective positions. Number one, if they ever got to the federal court, that would be in the federal court for about 22 seconds, I'll tell you, because we would be sent to the woodshed on trying to tell Verizon how to plan its poles for the purposes of providing and filling coverage gaps under the Federal Telecommunication Act. But dealing with the more local issues, and thank you for allowing us to deal with the local issues, I think this does fit within the parameters of the bylaw, and I would be willing to vote in support of finding that the pole is a structure, and this is a camouflage structure, and with all due respect to Mr. Prondak, that this use should be allowed as a matter of right, and secondly, that I understand the neighbors' concerns, and if I lived near these poles, I'd be saying the same thing. But in point of fact, and I've had these telecommunications monopoles that have been next to houses, 35, 40 feet, and they're just they're heart-wrenching. But here, I understand what the neighbors are saying. I think based upon what they're saying, it would be nice if it could be placed somewhere else. But that's not our function to tell Verizon what's the best way to cover gaps. We have no authority, we have no right to do that. And this type of device is, to me, one of the least aggravating or the least offensive types of transmission devices to cure serious gaps that are in issue here. And so I would vote that this application should be allowed as a matter of right. That's my position. Now, Mr. Gray, what do you have to say?
I think your points are well taken, as loath as I am to overrule Mr. Prondak, who is taking a conservative, I understand the positions you're taking. I think that your points are well taken, that the placement of this antenna, that a pole is a structure. I kind of jumped to that conclusion already. Sorry for our town council's office, but I sort of made that assumption based on, I don't know, my own thinking. And I think that the placement of this antenna, what's it called? Canister antenna, on top of the pole versus on the side, whatever. It looks like a transformer. There's a million transformers all over the town. It's close enough to being, within the penumbra of camouflage that I think it's fine to approve on that basis.
Let me ask you one question for the benefit of the neighbors who are here. If we do vote that this is allowed as a matter of right on the 5 applications, then they go to the telecommunications
Design review.
Design
committee,
review.
I think next, right?
Okay. And And the neighbors are, that's a public hearing, just like we're having here.
think so.
And the neighbors have the opportunity to go and express their views and try to get the design review committee to maybe make a compromise with the,
I think the only difference, Mr. Lennon, is they don't get direct notification. Like, it would just be an ad in the paper, I believe, as opposed to a mailing.
okay, all right. But so they would have the opportunity to participate in that hearing and probably have a little more flexibility in maybe getting some flexibility from the applicant, but we really don't have that here. We're calling this as a matter of, we're making legal decisions here, and we're not planning these polls, or, so I think you're not without a remedy, but I think that's where your remedy is. And I think that's where it belongs, to be frank, because we're handling larger issues, and we don't know anything about these systems, and this is not the place where we should be designing systems for anybody. It's not our expertise. So, Ms. O'Donnell, do you want to be heard, or you?
I'm agreeing with Nick and that, and you, Mr. Leonard and Mr. Ray, that it's structure. I'm certainly cognizant as a former town council person myself about the advice that town councils give. And also that the federal communications regulations override most of us anyway. And I would note that, as I said, looking at these specs, I mean, it's not, I'd much rather see a 12-inch wide and 38-inch high thing on top of a pole than when I came back from somewhere and all of a sudden saw this huge telecommunications tower that you can see from my backyard. So I would be supportive of
we had
these.
that. To talk about the Blue Hills,
Yeah.
we had an applicant who had a 36-foot tower. The base of the tower was that wide. It was in an area near the Blue Hills, and it was, you could see it in the neighborhood that surrounded this pole, even though it was supposed to be camouflaged, quote unquote. Though those houses were very expensive houses. We denied that particular application, and Judge Rhea Zobel in the federal district court respectfully disagreed with our determination and ordered the pole permitted, and ordered us to grant the permits without further hearings, without further activity. So this is nothing that compares to that, but that's one of the difficulties where you're dealing with poles. Okay, so all those, with respect to the application of 283 Blue Hill Parkway, all those in favor of a determination that application should be granted as a matter of right?
Aye.
Aye. Well, that's unanimous. With respect to 134 Blue Hill Avenue, all those in favor of ruling that application should be granted as a matter of right?
Aye.
With respect to 133 Center Street in Milton, all those in favor of a determination that application should be granted as a matter of right?
Aye.
With respect to the application at Brook Road and Central Streets in Milton, Massachusetts, all those in favor of ruling that application should be granted as a matter of right?
Aye.
And with respect to the application at 4 Annapolis Road in Milton, Massachusetts, all those in favor of ruling that application should be granted as a matter of right?
Aye.
Aye.
So all of the applications have been granted as with unanimous votes as a matter of right. Thank you all for coming. I know it's a little late, but we appreciate your attendance and we appreciate your being here.
Thanks for taking us into consideration.
Thank you, sir.